Now it'd be very tempting right here just to take this data that we've got and say, well, the oxygen sensor is bad, let's replace it. But we really need to prove it. We need to get the evidence. So the way we're going to do that is we're actually going to go down to the oxygen sensor. Because see, what we've been reading so far is data from the computer, from the scanner. And the scanner is telling us what it wants us to know. In other words, it's giving us data, but it's not live data. So we need to verify that the information that's coming into the scanner is actually accurate. So we're going to go down to the oxygen sensor. Actually, in this case, we're going to go to the computer connector and just use a multimeter and see what it's reading. So let's do that now. Now we want to tap into the oxygen sensor, but in this car it's kind of buried in the back side and way down. We can get up to it if we needed to replace it, but to actually test it, it's just as quick just to go to the computer and find the feed wire or the reporting wire that comes in the computer, and we'll test it there. So the computer is just not too hard to get to. You just have to take the breather box off. It's mounted down inside where the air filter is at. And as we look at the wiring diagram, we can see that it's in the middle connector, and it's a purple wire with a white trace. So we basically just back probed into that wire. We've got it hooked up to our multimeter, and you can see our multimeter right here. Now as we look at the multimeter, keep in mind now this multimeter is actually tapped into the oxygen sensor itself. Our scanner is tapped into the car's computer, and we're reading, it's staying ranging between 0.0 and 0.3, currently at 0.33. But look at our multimeter. We're going down to 0.1 and we're going up to 0.8. 0.1, 0.8. Now this doesn't graph it, so you have to kind of visualize that with your eyes. But if you look down here at the bottom, you can see the one going across, and it's showing that it's actually ranging. So the oxygen sensor itself appears to be ranging full range from 0.2 to 0.9. But all the while, when we look at the scanner, we're never going above 0.3. Well, this is at idle. What we want to do is now accelerate it. So we're going to rev the engine a little bit. You can see that the multimeter went rich and it stayed rich. And this one is actually leaving a trace that we can see, and it still never went above 0.39. So according to this, the oxygen sensor is doing its job, but the scanner is saying that it's not. So which one do we believe, and why? The DVOM is reading live data that is being fed into the PCM. The scanner is displaying the data that it is using for its calculations. Well, I would rather believe the live data because it matches what I was expecting to see from a good O2. So what's our next step? We want to try and force it lean and force it rich and see if they'll respond. Now to force this lean, we want to create a vacuum leak, and we're going to create a pretty large one. So we're going to pull this line right off of the intake. As you can tell, we're making a big vacuum leak. So let's look at the tools while we do that. So first off, let's look at the scanner. It's still not going above 0.39, it's reading 0.37. But when I create the vacuum leak, now it shows it going down to 0.0, so it's seeing the lean side, and so is the multimeter. It's showing it's very lean. We put this back on and we wait for it to stabilize. Now we're going to take a little carburetor cleaner we can see that it's stabilized because it's coming back on the scanner. Now we're just going to put a little carburetor cleaner here, and it should drive it rich. And if it's working correctly, this should go to 0.9, and this should go up to 0.9 as well. So we're going to put a little carburetor cleaner in it. We'll probably kill the engine. Okay, restart it. Now you can see that this went to 0.9, but our scanner still never went above 0.3. Just let it stabilize a little bit. Now we're switching. Going to give it a little bit more fuel. Reading directly from the oxygen sensor, our data says we're switching, full range. And when we create a vacuum leak, it goes lean. And when we add fuel, it goes rich, full range. But the scanner never goes above 0.3. It will go lean, but it won't recognize the rich. Do you think the scanner data could be wrong? If you say yes, what would you do next? If you say no, what would you do next? Now this sounds kind of conflicting. It doesn't sound right. The scanner is not reading right, but the oxygen sensor is. So anytime I get something like that, I like to check my equipment. So what I'm going to do is bring in another scanner. Possibly our scanner is wrong, and it's just not reading right. So we're going to undo the Genesis, and we're going to hook to my Verus. Okay, now we've hooked up a different scanner because we want to make sure our information is correct. So we've unplugged the Genesis, we've hooked up the Verus. Now I've already done my setups where I can get this to display. Now we're hooked into the scanner, not the lab scope. So we're looking at what the computer is telling us. As you can see, its live data is it's still switching from close to 0 up to 3, 3.4. And if you look over at this, we are switching, it is ranging, but we're going down close to 0, but it's not going much above 3.5 volts. Now let's accelerate this, and we should see this switch. Now if you look over here, we're going barely above 300, but we're not even making up to 4 or a half a volt. But if you look over here at the flute, the multimeter, we're ranging 0.8, or very rich. Now when we take our foot off the accelerator, we give it a few minutes to stabilize, the oxygen sensor should start switching again. Takes a few minutes for it to stabilize, but now we should start switching above and below half a volt. Now we're reaching down close to half a volt. The scanner is still staying about 300 millivolts. And we look at the O2 sensor itself, and we're switching above and below a half a volt. And I'm going to go into the lab scope. Now we've got our presets already done here. Now we're looking at live data. I've tapped right into the computer wire that is coming from the oxygen sensor. So we're looking at live data, and you can see that it is actually switching. It's dropping down to close to 0, and it's switching up close to above 9, with a half a volt being right here in the middle. So it is switching above and below half a volt. If you look at our data range, you can see that the live is switching, going down to 0.07, going up as high as 0.9. Okay, we've used two different scanners, and both of them are saying that the oxygen sensor is not coming up to half a volt. It's not switching. But yet our multimeter, which is directly on the oxygen sensor, is saying that it is switching. Actually, our multimeter and the lab scope both are saying that. So what could cause this? Should we still throw an oxygen sensor at it? So where are we? We have information coming into the computer directly from the sensor that sure appears to be correct, and we've verified that. And yet the data coming from the scanner, which is the computer talking to us, is not correct. It's not coinciding. Now, you know, computers are binary devices. They can read binary code, which is zeros and ones. They can't read voltages and they can't read temperatures. So those inputs have to be converted. The computer then can read the zeros and ones, do its calculations, convert it back out if it needs to, and send out voltages. So something's happening inside this computer that we can't see, we can't measure, and we really can't test. All we can do is say that the computer is a logical device. It should be working logically. It has the right information in, but it is not processing it. Now keep in mind, the computer is a logical device. It's solid state. There's no moving parts. All you have is wires in and wires out for inputs or outputs. So the only thing we can do here is test the inputs and see if the outputs are correct. So if the computer has proper and good power and proper and good ground, and it has information coming in, then somewhere internally in that computer it's not logical. So we're going to test our powers and grounds to confirm that. So again, we look at our information service and get the pinout chart, which tells us every wire connector going in and out of the computer, and we look for all the powers and all the grounds, and we verified that they are all good. So at this point there's really nothing more we can test. We have to get another computer. Now it will have to be flashed or programmed for this car, put it in, and see if that fixes our problem and confirms our diagnosis. Now since we replaced the computer and reprogrammed it, we're actually going to have to perform a crank relearn procedure. Now for that you're going to need a scan tool so that you have controls, and there'll be clear instructions there about how to do it. It's not difficult, but there's a precise procedure that you need to go through. Okay, we got our computer changed, and this is the bad one. The new one's in. This is all installed. We've started it, brought it up to normal operating temperature. Now when we first suspected this problem, we were using the scanner, and we could see that it was not going above 0.5 volt. It was staying around 0.3. So now to verify, let's look at the scanner. We're going to go back to the Genesis, having hooked up the same way we did before. So we've got our Genesis and we're hooked back up to the scanner. We're looking at the oxygen sensor, and now you can see that it is switching. It's going down close to 0 and it's going up to 0.9. Right now we're reading 0.67, 0.7, 0.0, 0.7. So we are switching above and below 0.5 volt. It's running good. Not bogging down. There's no more black smoke out the tailpipe. There's no more codes. So it looks like our evidence this time is pointed to the problem, and we've fixed it. Now in your diagnostic process, we rely heavily on scanners, and they're great tools. But keep in mind, a scanner is telling you what the computer is allowing it to tell you. Now in this case, the scanner was not wrong or broken or bad. The scanner was actually reporting the data from the computer. But we didn't want to trust that. We wanted to prove it because it wasn't making sense. So we actually went to the sensor, found out that it was correct, working correctly, and that sensor was going into the computer. So it wasn't the scanner's fault. So when you're dealing with scanners, remember what they are and what they're reporting. They're giving you what the computer is allowing it to give you. If it's not making sense, use your head, think it through, find your evidence, and you'll find the problem.